Welcome to Monk's Temple. Settle in now. Find a comfortable position. Let your body rest against the chair or cushion beneath you. There's nowhere you need to be right now except right here, in this moment, with this voice, with your own breath moving through you like waves moving through an ocean that has no memory of where it began and no concern for where it ends. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is supporting you. Feel the air touching your skin. Feel the breath continuing its ancient rhythm, independent of your thinking, independent of your planning, independent of everything except life itself continuing to live through you. I want you to notice something about yourself right now. Notice how you arrived here tonight carrying invisible weights. Maybe you're carrying worry about something that hasn't happened yet. Maybe you're carrying regret about something that happened long ago. Maybe you're carrying the exhaustion of pretending to be someone you're not. You can feel these weights in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the space between your eyebrows where tension likes to hide. Now notice something else. Beneath all these weights, underneath the carrying and striving and pretending, there's something that isn't weighed down at all. Something that's been there your whole life, watching everything, witnessing everything, never once adding its own opinion to what it sees. That something is what we're going to explore together tonight. The Buddha spent 29 years as a prince before he discovered this something. He had everything, palaces for every season, servants who anticipated his needs, a wife who loved him, a son who would carry his legacy. Luxurious fabrics, exquisite foods, beautiful music, endless entertainment. And yet he felt something gnawing at him. A restlessness. A sense that all the pleasure in the world couldn't quite reach the place where he actually lived. So he left. Not because he was ungrateful. He left because he was honest enough to admit that the pleasure he'd been promised wasn't delivering what it promised. The salt water of sensual desire wasn't quenching his thirst, it was making him thirstier with every sip. I had a client named Diane who understood this. Diane was successful by any measure. She'd built a company from nothing and sold it for millions. She had a penthouse with ocean views. She had dinner parties and gallery openings and weekends at exclusive resorts. She had everything the magazines tell you to want. And Diane was dying inside. Not dramatically, no one would have known by looking at her. She smiled at the right moments. She said the right things. But slowly, quietly, she was suffocating under the weight of her own success. She came to see me because she couldn't figure out why she felt empty when her life was so full. I keep waiting for the feeling to come, she told me. The feeling that I've made it. That I'm enough. That I can finally relax. But it never comes. I achieve something, and for about 10 minutes, I feel great. Then it fades and I'm already looking for the next thing to achieve. Diane had discovered the same truth the prince discovered. The pleasure of acquisition is like drinking through a straw with a hole in it. No matter how much you pour in, you never feel full. You just keep drinking, keep chasing, keep hoping the next sip will finally satisfy. But it never does. Because the problem isn't what you're drinking, the problem is the cup itself. This isn't a character flaw. It's simply how the mind works when it doesn't understand its own nature. The mind reaches for pleasure the way a plant reaches for sunlight. Automatically, instinctively, without questioning whether the reaching actually serves its deepest needs. But here's what the plant knows that we forget. The plant doesn't reach for sunlight because sunlight is the goal. The plant reaches because sunlight allows it to do what it's here to do: grow, bloom, live fully. The reaching serves something deeper. Our reaching for pleasure is the same. We think we want the pleasure itself. But what we actually want is what we think the pleasure will bring us. A moment of peace. A feeling of enoughness. A brief respite from the endless craving. We want the feeling behind the feeling. The Buddha's great insight was that you don't have to get what you want to find what you're actually seeking. You can go direct. You can bypass the middleman of acquisition and arrive at the peace that pleasure only promises. This is what we're doing here tonight. We're learning to find the pleasure that doesn't require getting anything, achieving anything, becoming anything. The pleasure that's been here all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to stop looking long enough to notice it. Think about the last time you really wanted something you couldn't have. Remember the ache of it, the way it occupied your mind, the way you imagined how different life would be once you finally got it. Now remember what happened after you got it. The ache returned, didn't it? Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Always eventually. Because the ache isn't about what you have or don't have. The ache is about the reaching itself. A woman named Patricia taught me this through her experience with food. Patricia had struggled with emotional eating for decades. She'd try every diet, every program, every promise of transformation. She'd lose weight, feel great for a while, and then slowly gain it all back. Each time she'd blame herself. Each time the cycle would repeat. When Patricia started paying attention to what actually happened in moments of craving, she discovered something surprising. The craving wasn't actually about food. The craving was about a feeling she wanted to escape: loneliness, boredom, anxiety, emptiness. Food was just the tool she used to try to change that feeling. The tool never worked permanently, so she kept reaching for it again and again. This is the mechanism the Buddha pointed to. The reaching itself is what keeps us trapped. Not the things we reach for. Not the pleasures we attain. The reaching. The endless, habitual, automatic reaching for something outside ourselves to fix something inside ourselves. Before we go deeper, I invite you to subscribe to Monk's Temple. If something in these words is resonating with you, please click the subscribe button below. It helps these teachings reach more people who need them. Thank you. Now let's continue. Let me tell you about a man named Richard. Richard was a lawyer who had spent 20 years building his reputation, his practice, his identity around being the person who never lost. He was known for his sharp mind, his relentless preparation, his ability to find the weakness in any argument. Colleagues respected him. Opponents feared him. Richard had built his entire world on the foundation of winning. Then he lost a case. Not just any case. A big case, a public case, a case that made the news. Richard didn't just lose, he lost spectacularly, in a way that everyone in his professional world witnessed. In the weeks that followed, Richard couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He replayed every moment of that trial hundreds of times, finding different choices he could have made, different arguments he could have presented, different strategies that might have changed the outcome. When Richard came to see me, he wasn't looking for spiritual insight. He was looking for relief from the torment of his own mind. I can't stop thinking about it, he told me. It's like a movie that keeps playing in my head, and I can't find the remote to turn it off. I asked Richard to close his eyes and notice where in his body he felt the loss most intensely. He sat quietly for a moment, then placed his hand on his chest. "Here," he said. Right here. It feels like something heavy is sitting on my chest. Good, I told him. Now just breathe into that spot. Don't try to make the feeling go away. Don't try to understand it or analyze it. Just breathe into it, the way you breathe into a tight muscle to help it relax. Richard sat with his hand on his chest for several minutes, breathing softly. When he opened his eyes, something had shifted. The weight was still there, he said, but it had changed. It wasn't pressing down on him anymore. It was just present. Like a visitor who had stopped demanding attention. This is the first lesson in working with difficult experiences, I explained to Richard. You've spent your whole life trying to win, to make unpleasant things go away and bring pleasant things closer. But what if there's another way? What if you could relate to difficulty without needing it to disappear? This is exactly what the Buddha discovered. The problem isn't that difficult things happen. The problem is our relationship to them. We push away what we don't want. We grasp at what we do want. And in that pushing and grasping, we create suffering on top of whatever is already there. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing on a beach and a wave comes toward you. You can't stop the wave. You can't make it go away. But you can choose how to meet it. You can tense your body and brace against it, which will hurt when the wave hits. Or you can relax into it, let it wash over you, and discover that you're still standing when it passes. Most of us spend our lives bracing against waves that have already passed or waves that haven't even arrived yet. We brace against the memory of past pain, reliving it over and over. We brace against the anticipation of future pain, imagining scenarios that may never happen. And in all that bracing, we miss the only moment we actually have, this one, right now. A woman named Helen learned this through an experience that would have broken many people. Helen's husband of 34 years died suddenly of a heart attack. They'd been planning their retirement together, dreaming of travel and grandchildren and lazy mornings with nowhere to be. Then, in an instant, all of it was gone. Helen came to a meditation group I was leading, not because she believed in meditation but because she didn't know what else to do with herself. The grief was overwhelming. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She couldn't imagine a future that didn't feel hollow and empty. During one sitting, Helen had an experience she later described as a small miracle. She was watching her breath, following the instructions, when suddenly the grief didn't disappear, but her relationship to it shifted. Instead of being consumed by the grief, she was aware of the grief. There was grief, and there was Helen watching the grief. And the watching part, the awareness itself, wasn't grieving. It was just witnessing. This moment didn't take away Helen's pain. She still missed her husband terribly. She still had moments when the loss felt unbearable. But something had fundamentally changed. She had discovered that she was not her grief. She was the one who knew the grief. And that knowing part, that awareness, had a quality of peace that grief could not touch. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke about liberation. Not freedom from experience, freedom in the midst of experience. Not the end of pain, the end of suffering in relation to pain. Not the absence of difficulty, the presence of awareness that is not disturbed by difficulty. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the difficulties you're carrying right now. The worries. The regrets. The fears. Notice how much of your suffering comes not from the difficulties themselves but from your resistance to them. The way you tell yourself stories about how things shouldn't be this way. The way you replay past moments wishing you could change them. The way you imagine future disasters as if they've already happened. All of that, the storytelling, the replaying, the imagining, that's optional. That's extra. That's suffering you're adding on top of whatever pain is actually present. The practice we're exploring together is about learning to drop the extra. Not by force. Not by willpower. But by seeing clearly what's actually here and what's just added by the mind. By learning to rest in awareness itself, which is never troubled by anything it witnesses. Now let's talk about the breath. Not as a concept, but as an actual living experience happening right now in your own body. Take a moment and notice it. Don't try to change it, just notice. Is it deep or shallow? Fast or slow? Smooth or uneven? Where do you feel it most clearly? In your nostrils? Your chest? Your belly? The rise and fall of your ribcage? The movement of your shoulders? The breath is extraordinary when you really pay attention to it. It's both automatic and voluntary. You don't have to think about breathing, your body does it for you, 20,000 times a day, every day of your life, without ever taking a vacation. But you can also take control of it. You can lengthen it, shorten it, deepen it, soften it. This dual nature makes the breath the perfect bridge between the unconscious body and the conscious mind. The Buddha called breathing bodily fabrication. It's the most fundamental way we shape our experience of being alive. Every emotion has a corresponding breath pattern. When you're anxious, your breath becomes quick and shallow, high in the chest. When you're angry, your breath becomes tight and constrained, like it's fighting against something. When you're sad, your breath becomes long and sighing, heavy with the weight of grief. When you're peaceful, your breath becomes soft and even, like waves gently lapping at the shore. By working with the breath, you work directly with your emotional state. You can't always control what you feel, but you can always influence how you breathe. And when you change your breath, you change your nervous system. You change your brain. You change your experience of being alive in this moment. A woman named Sarah discovered this during a period of intense anxiety. Sarah was a teacher, and she loved her work, but the demands of the job had become overwhelming. Budget cuts, large class sizes, difficult parents, constant testing, it was all piling up. By the time she came home each day, she was so wound up she couldn't relax. She'd lie in bed at night with her mind racing, heart pounding, body tense, unable to sleep. Sarah's doctor wanted to prescribe medication. Her friend suggested wine. Her husband recommended exercise. Nothing seemed to help. Then someone mentioned meditation, and Sarah was desperate enough to try anything. The first few times she sat, nothing happened. Her mind just continued its frantic pace, jumping from worry to worry. But she kept showing up, day after day, sitting for 10 minutes, watching her breath. And gradually, something shifted. She noticed that when she focused on her breath, the worrying thoughts didn't disappear, but they lost some of their power. They were still there, but she wasn't completely caught up in them anymore. It was like watching clouds pass across the sky instead of being lost inside the clouds themselves. Then one night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. But instead of lying there worrying, she decided to just watch her breath. In and out. In and out. She noticed how shallow her breathing had become, how tight her chest felt. So she experimented. She intentionally lengthened her out-breath, making it slower and longer than her in-breath. She'd learned somewhere that this activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the body responsible for relaxation. Within a few minutes, Sarah felt her body begin to soften. The tightness in her chest eased. Her heart rate slowed. Her mind quieted. For the first time in months, she fell asleep naturally, without fighting her own nervous system. Sarah had discovered something profound. The breath isn't just air moving in and out of lungs. It's a tool. A technology. A gateway to states of peace that are always available but often overlooked. A man named Thomas learned this in a different way. Thomas was a veteran who suffered from PTSD. He'd served in a war zone and carried memories that haunted him daily. Loud noises would send him diving for cover. Crowded spaces made him panic. Sleep was a battlefield of nightmares. Thomas had tried therapy, medication, support groups, everything the system offered. Nothing touched the deep wounds he carried. Then a counselor suggested something called breath work. Thomas was skeptical, but he was also exhausted from years of suffering. The first time he tried it, nothing dramatic happened. But something interesting did occur. When a memory arose, one of the terrible ones that usually sent him spiraling, he noticed his breath had become quick and shallow. So he deliberately slowed it down. He lengthened it. And as he did, the memory didn't disappear, but its power over him diminished. He was still remembering, but he wasn't reliving. There was a space between the memory and his response to it. Over months of practice, that space grew larger. The memories were still there, they always would be. But Thomas was no longer a prisoner of them. He had discovered that between stimulus and response, there is a gap. And in that gap lies his freedom. This is what the Buddha meant when he talked about using the breath to cultivate concentration. Not as an escape from life, but as a way of engaging with life more skillfully. When the mind is concentrated, it has power. When it has power, it has choices. When it has choices, it has freedom. Your breath is always with you. Always available. Always free. You don't need special equipment or a particular location. You don't need to be religious or spiritual. You just need to pay attention to something that's been happening right under your nose your entire life. So right now, in this moment, take a deeper breath. Feel the air filling your lungs. Feel your ribcage expand. Feel your belly rise. Then let it go slowly, completely, without holding on to anything. Notice the pause at the end of the out-breath, that moment of stillness before the next breath begins. That stillness is always there, waiting for you to notice it. And in that stillness, something remarkable becomes visible. Something that was never born and can never die. Something that is your true home. Let me share a story about a man named David who worked on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. David spent 3 weeks at a time surrounded by nothing but water and sky, followed by 1 week on land with his family. The work was dangerous, the hours were long, and the isolation was extreme. Most people would have found it unbearable, but David loved it. When I asked him what made the difference, he said something I've never forgotten. Out there, he told me, there's nowhere to hide. No distractions. No stores. No restaurants. No internet. Just you, the ocean, and your own mind. At first that terrified me. I'd never been alone with myself before. But after a while, I started to realize something. My mind was the most interesting place I'd ever been. David had discovered what meditators have known for thousands of years. The mind, when you actually pay attention to it, is infinite. It contains universes within universes. Thoughts arise from nowhere and dissolve into nothing. Emotions sweep through like weather systems, changing everything, then passing on. Beneath all of it, there's a stillness that never moves, never changes, never gets disturbed by anything that happens on the surface. The Buddha called this the unconditioned. Not something you create, but something you uncover. Not something you achieve, but something you recognize. It's been here all along, hidden behind the noise of your thinking, waiting for you to stop long enough to notice it. I worked with a woman named Julia who was a professional organizer. She helped people declutter their homes, their offices, their lives. Julia was brilliant at her work. She could walk into the most chaotic space and immediately see what needed to stay, what needed to go, and how to arrange everything for maximum efficiency and peace. But Julia's own mind was a mess. Constant worry. Endless self-criticism. A running commentary of judgment about everything she did and didn't do. She could organize any space except the one that mattered most, the space between her own ears. When Julia started meditating, she approached it the way she approached a cluttered closet. She wanted to organize her thoughts, arrange them neatly, get rid of the ones that weren't useful. But meditation doesn't work that way. You can't organize thoughts like you organize objects. Thoughts are alive. They move. They multiply. They resist being controlled. It took Julia months to understand this. She'd sit down to meditate and immediately start trying to fix her mind. When that didn't work, she'd get frustrated. When frustration didn't work, she'd get discouraged. She was ready to give up entirely when something shifted. She was sitting on her cushion, watching her breath, when she suddenly saw the problem. She was treating her mind like a closet that needed organizing. But the mind isn't a closet. It's more like the ocean. You can't organize the ocean. You can't arrange the waves in neat rows. But you can learn to swim. You can learn to float. You can learn to ride the waves instead of being crushed by them. This insight changed everything for Julia. She stopped trying to control her thoughts and started learning to relate to them differently. When worry arose, she'd notice it, worry. When self-criticism arose, judgment. When planning arose, future. She didn't try to make these things go away. She just labeled them and returned to her breath. Over time, something remarkable happened. The thoughts still arose, they always will, but they lost their power over her. They were like visitors who knock on the door and then leave when no one answers. Julia had discovered that she didn't have to open the door to every thought that came knocking. This is a crucial teaching from the Buddha. He said that the mind is naturally radiant, but it's stained by visiting defilements. The radiance is always there, like the sun behind clouds. The clouds come and go, but the sun doesn't come and go with them. It just keeps shining, waiting for the clouds to part. Your mind is like that. Beneath all the thoughts, all the worries, all the plans and memories and judgments, there's something that's simply aware. Aware of the thoughts without being them. Aware of the worries without being worried. Aware of everything without being anything in particular. Most people never discover this because they're too busy being lost in the clouds. They think they are the clouds, the thoughts, the emotions, the stories. But you're not the clouds. You're the sky. The clouds come and go, but the sky remains. Always. Unchanged. Untouched. Think about your own experience right now. Notice the thoughts passing through your mind. Notice how they come from nowhere and go to nowhere. Notice how you can watch them the way you'd watch birds flying across the sky. The birds don't disturb the sky. The thoughts don't disturb the mind, unless you believe you are the thoughts. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to. Not freedom from thinking. Freedom from identifying with thinking. Not the end of thoughts. The end of suffering caused by believing thoughts are who you are. So right now, just for a moment, stop trying to organize your mind. Stop trying to fix anything. Stop trying to become anyone different than you already are. Just rest in awareness itself. Notice what it feels like to simply be here, present, awake, without needing to change anything. That presence, that simple, ordinary awareness, is your true nature. And it's perfect exactly as it is. Let me tell you about a man named Frank who ran a small bookstore in a neighborhood that was slowly being gentrified. Frank had been there for 40 years, since he was a young man with dreams of being a writer. The writing never happened, but the bookstore became his life. He knew every inch of it, every book on every shelf, every customer who walked through the door. Then the landlord sold the building. The new owners doubled the rent. Frank couldn't afford it. After 4 decades, his bookstore was closing. Frank came to see me because he was drowning in grief. Not just grief about the store, grief about his identity, his purpose, his reason for getting up in the morning. Who am I without the store? He kept asking. I've been the bookstore guy for 40 years. If I'm not that, what am I? This question is at the heart of Buddhist practice. Who are you when you strip away everything you've accumulated? Your possessions, your relationships, your career, your reputation, your memories, your plans, take all of that away, and what's left? The Buddha's answer was both simple and revolutionary. What's left is awareness itself. Not awareness of anything in particular. Just awareness. Pure, naked, undecorated awareness. And this awareness, he said, is not touched by any of the things that arise and pass away within it. Frank couldn't understand this at first. He was too identified with his story, the story of the bookstore owner, the neighborhood fixture, the man who always knew what book to recommend. That story was ending, and he felt like he was ending with it. I asked Frank to close his eyes and notice his breath. Just notice it, the sensation of air moving in and out. Then I asked him to notice the one who was noticing. Not the thoughts about the noticing. Not the story of who was noticing. Just the raw, direct experience of being aware. Frank sat quietly for a long time. When he opened his eyes, there were tears on his cheeks. It's still here, he whispered. The awareness. It was here before the store. It was here during all those years. It's here now. It doesn't care about the store at all. Frank had touched something profound. He'd seen, even if only for a moment, that his identity was not who he actually was. The bookstore owner was a role he'd played, a collection of habits and memories and relationships. But underneath all of that, there was something that had never been a bookstore owner, never been anything at all except pure presence. This is what the Buddha meant when he talked about not self. Not that you don't exist. Not that your experiences aren't real. But that everything you identify with, your body, your feelings, your thoughts, your roles, your relationships, all of these are processes, not fixed entities. They arise and pass away. They change constantly. None of them is stable enough to call a self. And when you stop trying to find a self in these shifting processes, something remarkable happens. You discover the one who was looking all along. The awareness that witnessed every change, every loss, every gain, every joy, every sorrow. That awareness was never touched by any of it. It just watched, like the sky watches clouds. A woman named Gloria discovered this through a very different kind of loss. Gloria was a pianist, a concert-level performer who had played in some of the most beautiful venues in the world. Then she developed arthritis in her hands. Not severely at first, but progressively. The day came when she could no longer play the pieces she loved. The day came when she could no longer play at all. Gloria fell into a depression that lasted 2 years. Music wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. Without it, she didn't know how to exist. Friends tried to help. Therapists tried to help. Nothing reached her. Then one day, sitting at her piano, staring at the keys she could no longer play, Gloria had a moment of clarity. She realized that the part of her that loved music, the part that had always been moved by beautiful sounds, the part that felt alive when she played, that part was still there. It hadn't been taken away by the arthritis. It couldn't be taken away by anything. The music was gone, but the love of music remained. The playing was gone, but the listener remained. The identity was gone, but the awareness that had worn that identity remained. Gloria started listening to music instead of playing it. She'd sit in concert halls, eyes closed, letting the sounds wash over her. And she discovered something she'd never known as a performer. The music was still beautiful. The joy was still there. She just related to it differently now. She was receiving instead of creating. Witnessing instead of doing. This is the shift that practice makes possible. From being the doer to being the witness. From identifying with the wave to knowing yourself as the ocean. The waves still rise and fall. They still crash and dissolve. But you're no longer afraid of them because you know you're the water, not just the wave. So right now, take a moment to notice all the things you identify with. Your work. Your relationships. Your body. Your history. Your future. Notice how tightly you hold these things, how much of your sense of self depends on them. Then ask yourself, if all of this were taken away, what would remain? The answer is already here, waiting for you to notice it. It's the one asking the question. It's the awareness reading these words. It's what you've been looking for your entire life, hiding in plain sight, disguised as you. Let me share a story about a woman named Rebecca who was terrified of flying. Not just uncomfortable. genuinely terrified. The kind of terror that would start days before a flight, build to a peak at the airport, and leave her shaking and crying in her seat while everyone around her read magazines like nothing unusual was happening. Rebecca had tried everything. Therapy, medication, hypnosis, exposure therapy where she'd just sit in an airplane on the ground. Nothing touched the fear. Her rational mind knew that flying was statistically safe. Her rational mind knew that millions of people flew every day without incident. But her nervous system didn't care about statistics. It just kept sounding the alarm. A friend suggested meditation, and Rebecca was desperate enough to try anything. She started with short sessions, just 5 minutes a day, watching her breath. At first, nothing changed. Her mind still raced. Her body still tensed. But she kept showing up. Then one day, sitting on her cushion, Rebecca had an insight. She noticed that the fear wasn't one thing, it was many things. There was a physical sensation in her chest, tight and hot. There was a mental image of a plane crashing. There was a story in her mind about dying and leaving her children motherless. There was a judgment that she shouldn't be feeling this way. There was resistance to the resistance itself. All of these elements were arising together, reinforcing each other, creating what she called the fear. But when she looked closely, she couldn't find a single thing that was the fear. Just sensations, images, thoughts, judgments, all bundled together by habit and given a name. This is a crucial teaching from the Buddha. He said that what we call self is really just 5 aggregates coming together: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These aggregates arise together, depend on each other, and create the illusion of a solid, permanent self. But when you look closely, you can't find anything solid at all. Just processes. Just events. Just nature doing what nature does. Rebecca started applying this insight to her fear. When the terror arose, she'd mentally label each component. Tightness in chest. That's form. Unpleasant feeling. That's feeling. Image of crashing. That's perception. Story about dying. That's mental formation. Awareness of all this. That's consciousness. What happened next surprised her. The fear didn't disappear, but it lost its power over her. By breaking it down into components, she stopped believing it was one solid thing. And when she stopped believing it was one solid thing, she stopped believing it was her fear. It was just nature arising and passing away. She was just the space in which it arose and passed away. Rebecca's next flight was still uncomfortable. Her heart still raced. Her palms still sweated. But something had fundamentally shifted. She wasn't fighting the fear anymore. She was just watching it. And in the watching, there was a kind of peace that the fear couldn't touch. A man named Leonard discovered something similar through physical pain. Leonard had suffered from chronic back pain for over a decade. He'd seen specialists, tried treatments, taken medications. Nothing provided lasting relief. The pain was simply part of his life, every day, all day. Leonard started meditating not because he believed it would help, but because he'd run out of other options. He'd sit with the pain, watching it, breathing into it, trying to understand it. At first, this just seemed to make the pain worse. He was paying attention to something he'd spent years trying to ignore. But gradually, something shifted. Leonard noticed that the pain wasn't static, it changed moment by moment. Sometimes it was sharp, sometimes dull. Sometimes it throbbed, sometimes it burned. Sometimes it was in one place, sometimes it spread. It was never the same from one moment to the next. This observation led to another. If the pain was constantly changing, then the pain he'd been fighting all these years wasn't a thing, it was a process. And processes can be related to differently than things. You can't make a thing go away just by wishing, but you can learn to ride a process, to flow with it, to stop adding resistance to it. Leonard stopped fighting his back pain. Not because it went away, it didn't. But because he realized the fighting was making it worse. The pain itself was bearable. What was unbearable was the resistance to the pain, the wishing it would go away, the anger that it was still there after all these years. That resistance, that was suffering. The pain was just pain. This is the distinction the Buddha made again and again. There is pain, and there is suffering. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain is what happens to you. Suffering is what you add on top of it, the resistance, the aversion, the story about how things shouldn't be this way. Right now, take a moment to notice any discomfort in your body. Maybe it's physical, a tight shoulder, an aching back. Maybe it's emotional, a worry, a sadness, a loneliness. Just notice it. Don't try to make it go away. Don't judge it. Don't resist it. Just let it be there, the way you'd let a cloud be there in the sky. Now notice something else. Notice the one who's noticing. That awareness, is it in pain? Is it uncomfortable? Or is it just witnessing, untouched by what it sees? This is your refuge. This is your home. This is the pleasure that doesn't betray you when you need it most. Let me tell you about a man named Harold who spent 30 years as an executive at a corporation that no longer exists. The company was bought, sold, dismantled, and absorbed until nothing remained except memories in the minds of people who once worked there. Harold's entire career, all those years of meetings and presentations and late nights and strategic planning, gone. Erased. As if it never happened. When Harold retired, he expected to feel relief. Instead, he felt something closer to panic. Without the structure of work, without the identity of his title, without the daily demands that had shaped his life for 3 decades, he didn't know who he was. He'd sit at home, staring at walls, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Harold's wife suggested meditation. Harold thought it was nonsense. But he was also desperate enough to try anything. He came to a class I was teaching, sat in the back with his arms crossed, ready to be unimpressed. I asked the group to close their eyes and notice their breath. Harold later told me that his first thought was, "This is stupid. I'm breathing. So what?" But he kept his eyes closed because he didn't want to be rude. Then something unexpected happened. Somewhere around minute 5, Harold's mind, which had been racing with judgments and criticisms, suddenly went quiet. Not completely quiet, but quieter than it had been in decades. In that space of relative quiet, Harold felt something he couldn't name. Not happiness exactly. Not peace exactly. Something simpler. something more basic. Something like coming home to a house he'd forgotten he owned. When the session ended, Harold opened his eyes and looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, breathing, letting the experience settle. Over the following weeks, Harold kept coming back to class. He kept sitting. He kept watching his breath. And gradually, something began to shift in his relationship to his own history. He started to see that the career he'd lost, the company that had vanished, the identity that had dissolved, none of that was actually him. It was just a role he'd played, a collection of activities he'd performed, a chapter in a story that was still being written. The Buddha spoke of this as seeing through the illusion of permanence. We build our lives on things that we believe will last, careers, relationships, reputations, bodies. But nothing conditioned lasts. Everything changes. Everything ends. The corporation Harold worked for no longer exists. The position he held no longer exists. The person he was during those years no longer exists. All of it arose, did its dance, and passed away. This sounds depressing until you understand what the Buddha was actually pointing to. If everything conditioned is impermanent, then your true happiness cannot depend on anything conditioned. It has to come from somewhere else. Somewhere not subject to change, loss, or decay. That somewhere is what Harold touched in those moments of quiet on his cushion. Not a thought. Not a feeling. Not an experience you can grasp or hold. Just presence itself. Just awareness aware of itself. Just the simple fact of being alive, being conscious, being here. A woman named Charlotte discovered this through a very different kind of loss. Charlotte was a collector, not of ordinary things, but of experiences. She'd traveled to over 70 countries, climbed mountains, dove oceans, trekked deserts. Her Instagram feed was a testament to a life fully lived. Friends envied her. Strangers followed her. Charlotte had built an identity around being the person who had done it all. Then the pandemic hit. Travel stopped. Adventures stopped. The experiences that had defined Charlotte's life were suddenly unavailable. She found herself stuck in her apartment, unable to do the one thing that made her feel alive. At first, Charlotte panicked. Without new experiences to chase, without new photos to post, without new stories to tell, who was she? The question terrified her. She'd spent 20 years building an identity on experiences, and now those experiences were gone. Someone sent Charlotte a link to a meditation app. She downloaded it cynically, assuming it wouldn't help. But she was desperate enough to try anything. The first few sits were unbearable. Her mind screamed for stimulation. Her body itched to move. She'd last 2 minutes before grabbing her phone, checking for messages, looking for something to distract herself. But Charlotte kept trying. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift. She started to notice that the craving for new experiences, the constant hunger for the next adventure, was itself a kind of suffering. It was a reaching, a grasping, a never quite being satisfied. And she started to wonder what might be left if the reaching stopped. One afternoon, sitting on her couch, Charlotte had a moment of clarity. She realized that the part of her that craved experiences wasn't who she actually was. It was just a habit, a pattern, a conditioned response. Beneath it, underneath all the craving and chasing, there was something that didn't need anything. Something that was already complete. Something that had been there all along, hidden behind the endless pursuit of the next thing. Charlotte later told me that this moment changed everything. Not because she stopped traveling, she didn't. But because travel was no longer an identity. It was just an activity. Something she did, not something she was. And in that shift, she found a freedom she'd been seeking her whole life without knowing it. This is what the practice offers. Not a different life. A different relationship to life. Not the end of seeking. The end of being driven by seeking. Not the disappearance of the conditioned. The discovery of the unconditioned that was always here, waiting to be recognized. Let me share a story about a woman named Irene who spent her life taking care of everyone else. As a child, she cared for her younger siblings while her parents worked. As a young woman, she cared for her aging parents. As a wife and mother, she cared for her husband and children. As a grandmother, she cared for her grandchildren. Irene's entire identity was built around being helpful, being needed, being indispensable. Then, in her 70s, Irene found herself alone. Her husband had passed. Her children lived in other states. Her grandchildren had grown. The people who had needed her for decades no longer needed her at all. Irene sat in her quiet house, surrounded by photographs and memories, wondering what she was supposed to do now. A neighbor invited Irene to a meditation group. Irene went because she didn't have anything else to do. She sat with the group, eyes closed, listening to instructions about watching the breath. It felt strange at first. All this attention on herself, when she'd spent her whole life focused on others. But something unexpected happened. As Irene sat with her breath, she began to notice sensations in her body she'd never paid attention to before. The tightness in her shoulders from years of carrying. The ache in her hands from decades of doing. The exhaustion in her heart from lifetimes of giving without receiving. These sensations had always been there, but she'd never had the space to notice them. Irene started coming to meditation regularly. Not because she was seeking enlightenment, she didn't even know what that word meant. She came because, for the first time in her life, she was giving herself permission to just be. Not do. Not help. Not fix. Just be. Over time, something shifted in Irene's relationship to her own history. She began to see that her identity as the helper wasn't who she actually was. It was a role she'd played, beautifully and generously, for 7 decades. But underneath that role, underneath all the doing and giving and caring, there was something simpler. Something that didn't need to be needed. Something that was complete just sitting there, breathing, watching the light change on the wall. The Buddha called this, letting go of becoming. We spend our lives trying to become something, successful, loved, important, helpful, enlightened. But this very striving to become keeps us trapped in suffering. Because becoming never ends. There's always another version of yourself to pursue, another identity to construct, another goal to achieve. What happens when you stop trying to become anything? When you're not trying to be helpful or successful or anything at all? What's left? Irene discovered what's left is peace. Not the peace of achieving something. Not the peace of finally getting what you wanted. Just peace itself. Simple, ordinary, always available peace. The peace of a mind that stopped reaching. The peace of a heart that stopped grasping. The peace of simply being here, now, without needing to be anything other than what you already are. A man named Philip discovered something similar through his work as a carpenter. Philip built furniture, beautiful, handcrafted pieces that would last for generations. He loved his work, loved the feel of wood under his hands, loved the process of transforming raw materials into something useful and beautiful. But Philip also suffered from what he called the curse of completion. Every time he finished a piece, he'd feel a momentary satisfaction, followed by emptiness. The piece was done. Now what? He'd immediately start looking for the next project, the next commission, the next opportunity to prove himself again. Philip came to meditation hoping to find relief from this cycle. He wanted to enjoy his successes without immediately needing the next one. He wanted to feel satisfied with what he'd accomplished instead of always looking ahead. During one sitting, Philip had an insight that changed everything. He saw that his identity as the carpenter who makes beautiful things was exactly what was causing his suffering. He'd attached his sense of self to his work. So when the work was done, the self that was attached to it had nothing to hold on to. It needed new work immediately to feel alive again. The solution wasn't to make better work or to appreciate his work more. The solution was to see that he was not his work. The carpenter was a role, an activity, a collection of skills and habits. But underneath that, there was something that had never built anything, never completed anything, never needed anything. That something was his true nature. Philip still builds furniture. He still loves his work. But now, when a piece is finished, he doesn't fall into emptiness. He admires what he's made, feels grateful for the opportunity to create, and then returns to the awareness that was there before the piece existed and will be there after it's gone. The furniture comes and goes. The awareness remains. Right now, notice all the things you're trying to become. A better person. A more successful person. A more enlightened person. A person who has it all figured out. Notice how much energy goes into this striving, this reaching, this endless becoming. Now ask yourself, what if you didn't need to become anything? What if you were already enough? What if the peace you're seeking through becoming was already here, hidden behind the striving itself? Just sit with these questions. Don't answer them. Just let them be there, like clouds in the sky. And notice what happens when you stop trying to become anything at all. Let me tell you about Walter. He was 94, lying in a hospice bed, afraid of disappearing. His daughter called because Walter couldn't find peace. I sat beside him. Close your eyes and notice your breath, I said. Just the sensation of air moving in and out. Walter's breath was shallow, but it was there. In and out. Now notice the one who's noticing, I said. Not your thoughts about yourself. Not your memories. Just the raw, simple fact of being aware. Can you feel that? Walter was quiet for a long time. When he opened his eyes, they were wet with tears. It's still here, he whispered. The awareness. It was here when I was a boy. It was here through all the wars and losses and joys. It's here now. It doesn't seem to care that my body is dying. That's right, I told him. Your body is a guest. It arrived, stayed for a while, and now it's preparing to leave. But the awareness that welcomed this body, that was never born and can never die. That's what you actually are. Walter died 3 days later, peacefully, with his daughter holding his hand. She told me that in his final hours, he would occasionally open his eyes and smile, not at anything in the room, but at something inside. Something that had always been there. Something death itself couldn't touch. This is what the Buddha meant by the deathless. Not a place you go after you die. A dimension you can touch right now, in this very life, in this very moment. It's hidden behind your thoughts, behind your worries, behind everything you think you are. It's the awareness reading these words. It's the silence between sounds. It's been here your whole life, waiting for you to notice it. The pleasure that doesn't betray you isn't something you need to find. It's something you need to stop overlooking. As we end our time together, carry this with you. When worry comes, ask, who is worrying? When desire arises, ask, who is wanting? When pain appears, ask, who is suffering? Keep asking. Keep looking. Keep returning to the awareness, asking the question. Thank you for being here at Monk's Temple. May your practice bear fruit. May you find the peace that passes understanding. May you discover what's been here all along. Good night. And happy practicing.